Your Partner in Success Radio is a free business podcast with host Denise Griffiths. It's all about great stories, conversation, and context to help you move your business and life forward with actionable tips and advice from her guest experts. To listen and subscribe, just find us on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you consume your podcasts.
Good morning and welcome. Today on Your Partner in Success Radio, I welcome Dr. Brad Stuart, a pioneering physician in end-of-life care. He's a healthcare innovator and an acclaimed author. And with over 50 years of medical experience, Dr. Stuart has revolutionized hospice and palliative care in the United States. And I'm not sure I pronounce palliative or palliative. I'll ask him. He's the mastermind behind the groundbreaking advanced illness, management AIM program, which received a $13 million grant from the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation. And his contributions to the field have earned him numerous accolades. And those accolades include Physician of the Year by California Association of Health Services at Home and a spot among the top 20 national difference makers by Health Leaders Media. Most recently, he was named a visionary by the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. I'm guessing on that word. I'm so sorry. His latest book, Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life, offers a profound explanation of mortality, bridging medical science and spiritual understanding. And his work challenges us to reconsider our perceptions of reality and the nature of death itself. And that book is on my desk as we speak. Good morning, Brad, and thank you for sending me your book. I have read it and reviewed it, and I'm impressed by the depth and compassion of your work exploring end-of-life care and human experience. But before we get started, can you share a bit about yourself with our audience and how you like to show up in the world?
Sure. Well, first, thanks very much, Denise, for having me on. This is great. Um, I'm I've been a physician for over 50 years. I pretty much tell the story of my career in my book, but I spent uh, years being a general internal medicine doctor in my own office. Saw a lot of people in the ICU, the emergency room. Treated them in the hospital. And I came to understand after years of doing that that saving lives is of course, our central mission in medicine. But the patients who fascinated me the most and the ones I really ended up focusing on were the ones that I couldn't save, where no matter what we did, we had no answer for their illness. We couldn't cure them. And at that point, as a doctor, you have a choice. You can go on to the next case and say, well, nothing I can do there. I need to move on. Or you can stay with that person and see where life leads you as it proceeds to the end. And that's what I chose to do. I wound up in hospice, spent a quarter of a century or so in end of life care, and I found some of the things that occurred there to be the most fascinating things that I was not even able to imagine when I went in. And that's really what the book is about. I came into medicine as a scientist, published a couple of papers in brain research that got me into Stanford Medical School. And, I had no religion when I grew up. It wasn't until I spent time with people who were getting ready to, or trying to get ready to leave this life, that I discovered what I think spirituality actually is. And that's why I decided to title the book Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life. Because I believe now that we have scientific research focusing on what happens to people at the end of their lives, and science is now focusing on the content of what people find uh, in ICUs as their hearts stop and they're brought back. They have stories to tell. And I think those stories are important to convey to people who are afraid, because it may be that there's not as much grounds for fear as there are grounds for hope at the end of life. So we can talk about whatever it is that you would like to touch on, from the medical aspects of what happens near the end of life, to how we treat people, to what I think is even more interesting, which is how can we learn together to heal, to find ways to heal ourselves and each other as we focus on what happens as life comes to an end.
I was so excited to get your book, and you and I have had a couple of conversations. And is it palliative or palliative?
You're right, it is palliative
Okay.
care.
I have been saying it wrong forever. So thank you for that.
Well,
But I wanted to, when I got the book, listen, I am not a religious person. I never have been. I never will be, but I am a deeply spiritual person. And I find that those are two very, very different things. And I was sharing with you that my grandmother, bless her, she's gone. She's been gone for a while now, but she was a deeply religious person, almost obnoxious about it, to be honest. And she was terrified. It, absolutely. She did not want to die. She didn't know what was coming. And I remember asking her, well, didn't your religion prepare you for this? And she just looked at me like she hated me. It was an interesting conversation.
yeah, I find that to be one of the most interesting aspects uh, of being a religious person. The people that I've been with near the end of life, I find that it is completely impossible to predict how a person will be, how they will feel, how they will react, and whether they'll react or respond. And what I mean by that is, will they just have an emotional reaction of fear to the fact that they're leaving this life, or will they respond? And is there anything I, as a physician or a healer, can do to help them really respond in a creative and helpful way to the fact that we need to face that death is coming, that it's time to let go, and uh, for some people, and like I say, it's impossible to predict from person to person. For some people, their religion is uh, a real comfort to them. They feel that they know that God is waiting, and that they'll be received with open arms. For others, their beliefs somehow seem to stand in the way. All their lives, maybe they've had a fixed set of beliefs. And for some people, they find that when they hear from me that we can't cure their illness, and that instead we need to begin to prepare for the end of life. And there are many things that we can do to be constructive about that. They react in ways that were unpredictable even to them. Uh, the people who really sometimes are the hardest to deal with and the hardest to help, are those who feel that their beliefs have let them down, that they have expected a miracle, that maybe
Right.
God will cure them. And if that doesn't happen, there is no sadder situation than when people find that their beliefs that they've held for so long are not working the way they thought they should. And that's the key.
I think you
The,
just explained my grandmother's attitude because she was deeply angry, deeply. And I couldn't figure it out. And until just now, well, I haven't spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, but it does make sense looking back on her attitude. And she was angry. And I didn't understand it. She had been ill for a long time. She had to have known this was coming.
yeah, and yet, especially with medicine the way we practice it now, we are not trained to help people learn to let go. We are trained to do everything we can possibly do to preserve life. And so doctors have lost touch by and large. Not all of us, but many of us have just lost touch with the ability to help with healing when curing doesn't work anymore. And I feel really bad for your grandmother. The one consolation, I guess, is that if it's any indication what people are experiencing now that, I mean, ironically, now that we have such advances in resuscitation science and critical care, we have a huge increase in the number of people who die and are brought back, say in the ICU. And many of them have stories to tell. The stories that people have about what's on the other side of death, the number of those accounts has really jumped recently to the point where there are a number of specialists in intensive care who work in the ICU all day and night who have begun to study these things and have written books about them, papers. Science, this is what's really ironic to me. Science is, I think, if it takes its mission really seriously, science is going to have to take that evidence into consideration and look at the limits that it imposes on itself. Science believes that all that's real, the only things that are things that we can touch and measure with our instruments. Nothing outside that is considered real. And yet the evidence coming from research in end of life phenomena and near death experiences really should cause us to question that. There's more to life and what comes after. I know now, having experienced it with many people and looking at the evidence, there's more to life than we think. And that could be some consolation to people who have trouble letting go at the end. It may not be as scary as people consider it to be, and yet, how can it not be, a real difficult barrier to get through because you do need to let go of all those things that you considered important, and even more difficult is you have to let go of who you think you are. That's the spiritual part. The part of us that survives death, if it's the case that that's really true, and the evidence is pointing, I think, more and more strongly to the fact that consciousness may survive death. The things that we need to let go of are things that are the most precious things we have, and those are elements of who we think we are, the self that we think we are. Letting go of that is a real task, and it cannot be easy. It just very few people find that simple or easy, and yet you can begin early before you even get ill to feel your way into what that may be like. That letting go process. That's what's so critical about what we're here to discuss.
And I have to, and I can say this with complete honesty, I've never been afraid of my own death. I do worry about who's going to take care of my cats and my dog if I just suddenly shuffle off, but I've already made arrangements for that just because they're important to me. But I've always thought that we are largely energy, and I could be dead wrong, but energy doesn't go away. Energy survives no matter who you are, what you're doing, what's going to happen. Energy is energy. And I have always been of the mind that once my body leaves this world, I'm going somewhere else. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing what's out there. I know, isn't that strange?
I don't, well, it's from the point of view of this world. If you're the kind of person that believes that this world is real and that's it, and when you die, uh, you're gone. If and I used to believe that myself before I saw so many things to the contrary. But if you're that kind of person, it's not going to be simple for you to to do the healing that is going to happen anyway at the time that you die, but could happen before that. And you talk about leaving your cats behind and your dog. People do leave other people behind. That's one of the
Hey,
most difficult parts of the
right.
whole thing, and yet
Exactly. And
it
that's the
happens.
thing I think that worries us the most, but it's going to happen. So if you're smart, you'll start making arrangements. It doesn't matter what age you are. Have a will, have a living will. I've had so much death in my family and among my friends. I've kind of, I could write a paper on it, but I know what's important and making sure that what you are leaving is cared for frees you up in my mind to go, hey, what's next? Here I go.
Yep, I think that's really true. Whatever, every state in the country is different in terms of its laws and regulations around, what those official documents are. But a living will, the most important things I think to really take care of ahead of time are appointing someone that you trust who has a strong voice to speak for you to your physicians and the other people who are caring for you as you get ill, because over a third of us, by the time we're ready to leave this life, we no longer can think or speak. And it's not just Alzheimer's and illnesses like that that are the issue. It's that as we get weaker and as medicine continues to keep us alive, as weak as we are, we can lose the ability to speak or even think. We may not even be awake. And at that point, it's too late to express your wishes. It's often too late to tell your doctors what you want and don't want in your care. So sitting down ahead of time and thinking through those things and completing those documents that in your state uh, say what you want, and more importantly, appoint another person who can speak to the doctors and has the courage to say, no, she did not want what you're proposing to do. She did not want to go to the ICU. She did not want a feeding tube. If those are things that you don't want, it's very important to appoint someone who can tell the doctors what it is that you yourself would wish for. Many people, many doctors, and I'm one of them, wish that everyone would do that because it's so difficult when we just don't know. So that's part of the preparation that isn't spiritual at all. I mean, it is when you go through the process of putting on paper what you want and who you want to speak for you. That's kind of a spiritual task, I guess, but it's so practical, and I wish everybody would do it.
We do need to do it. Listen, I've had so many things happen in my life that had me saying, how are you going to go out? Are you going to leave a big old mess? What's going to happen? I don't want to leave a big old mess. So there you have it. And I wanted to go back a little bit to what you were talking about earlier. Can you share a transformative patient experience that changed your understanding of mortality? I suspect that this was a while back and it must have really been one of those moments where you just said, what the heck? This is not what I thought. This is not what I believed. I need to look at this more.
Yeah, in fact, what I found to be really curious, and one of the things that drew me to write this book after 50 years of thinking, I really should write a book about all this. It took me 50 years to do it. I decided I finally needed to explore in the form of a book what it is that drew me to doing this and what was it that did change my mind, because I was really a skeptic long ago, a scientific skeptic, and I changed. And so I wanted to see what it was inside me that did that made that happen. And there was a person, there was actually many, many of them, but to answer your question, the person who woke me up probably the most was actually a person whom I knew before she got ill. She was a business partner of my wife's. My wife's a nurse, and she and her friend Stephanie decided to take over a home health agency and run it when it looked like it might not survive in the county where they lived. And Stephanie was very matter of fact, very, very nice. People all thought Stephanie was just really the kind of person that they could trust. And she developed a pain in her leg. Turned out she had cancer of the bone. It spread very quickly. And while she was getting chemotherapy at an academic center out of town, because the chemo that they needed to use was so powerful that she had to be in the hospital to get it. Uh, After the chemo, she had a seizure, an epileptic seizure, and she actually fell down and hit her head, uh, which could have been a disaster, but for her it was the opposite. When she woke up, she found herself in a different place than she had been before. She called it the knowledge place. And in fact, the whole first part of my book's composed of stories about people who taught me. And Stephanie's one of those stories. She has her own chapter. I went to speak to her, and her cancer had progressed to the point where it had invaded the part of her spine in her neck that carries the nerves down to her arms and legs, and she was paralyzed. So she spent her entire last month or two or three in bed. Her family had to attend to her. And, so many people in that situation are just devastated emotionally. She was the opposite. She was joyful. And I had to go and sit with her at her bedside over in the next county a couple of times to really dive into with her, where was she? Where had she gone that made her feel so free? Because that's really what she was. And so she told me about the knowledge place and said, where I am now, I can really look down upon who we think we are in regular life. And she said, we're like ants. We just run around, bump into things, and pull back and then go forward and bump into the next thing. We don't really think about what we're doing. We don't really feel about it. She said, the place I'm in now, I can see and understand all that. And at this point, I understand that where she had gone to before she died, and she was there for a few months, was very similar. And for all I know, maybe it's the same place that people seem to go after they die. It's the knowledge place. And the stories that people tell when they come back from being revived, say from cardiac arrest, and have a story to tell, they often talk about the knowledge that they possess in that place. It's all encompassing. They they have vast understanding that they never had when they were alive in a brain, and yet somehow that seizure or the head injury, I don't know what it was, freed her to go to that place before she died. And that really made me think. You can read the story in the book. I spent quite a while interviewing her, and I put in that chapter a lot of the questions that I asked her and what her answers were, and what happened. She asked me to preside at her memorial service after she died, and I did, and so, some amazing things happened in that service. So I'll let you read about that if you want to, but that it's funny. Uh, that didn't that woke me up, the experience with Stephanie, and yet, and I go back to this often in the book. It woke me up, and yet, once it woke me up, I looked at what I had learned, and I realized, you know what? I already knew this. I just wasn't really conscious of it, and I wasn't willing to believe it. I was too skeptical. I was too practical, and I just I hadn't opened myself to what I already knew. And that's an aspect of spirituality that I think is really important, that we already know. We we know where we came from, we know where we're going, we know who we are, but life on this earth takes us to places where we forget that. It just is, we're out of our minds in a way. And that's what Stephanie taught me, is that it's important to stop and take a breath and recenter yourself and remember what it is that you already know. And so I think that's the most straightforward answer to your question, although there were a lot of other people and some of their stories are in the book that helped me turn a lot of corners on my journey of learning.
For sharing that. And I did read that and I was amazed. I understand. And I kept thinking, I want to do what she did. I really do. But something you said just triggered a memory for me. And you were talking about, you know, when as we become adults, we lose so much of what I call the magic. Children understand magic, and I'm not talking about tricks, and I'm not talking about witchcraft. I'm talking about magic, which I think spirituality is in so many ways. And, you see children, they're talking to nothing. They're talking to a spider web. They're talking to ghosts. And kids see things that we don't see as we get older. It just goes away for some ungodly reason. I don't know why. But it just occurred to me that, excuse me, and I'm losing my voice today. You had sent, and I wanted to make this note. You had sent me when the book arrived, you sent a lovely letter in it. And at the bottom of the letter, you said, I hope you don't mind if I quote you. It doesn't matter if you do or don't, I'm going to do it. But it says, the big issue is how does hope and change evolve when you realize, just as everybody does eventually, that you won't live forever? And we've been talking about that. So I was excited to have this conversation with you.
That's funny, Denise, because before I wrote the book, actually a few years before, I've written a lot of papers and, published them in medical journals. And I actually wrote a couple of papers about hope before it even occurred to me that I wanted to write a book. I wrote a paper about two papers with a few partners from around the world, actually, about the evolution of hope. And I think it's important to understand these papers were published in the British Medical Journal, so and the Journal of the Mayo Clinic proceedings. These are real medical journals. They're not woo-woo. And the point that I was trying to make in those papers was, if you follow people as they realize that their life is not going to go on forever, if you follow them and look at what happens to their capacity to hope, what you find is that most people respond the same way. They start out hoping, and this is totally natural. You hope for a cure. I call that focused hope. You're focused on you and your doctors, because by the time say you have cancer, by the time you're battling for your life, you may have 5 or 6 different physicians, and you're all on a team, and you're all working very hard for a cure. That's focused hope. But if you get to the point where that approach doesn't work anymore, and you're not going to be cured, then people have to, I think, reevaluate their hope. Some people, and unfortunately many doctors, will not let go, refuse to let go of that focused hope. And doctors will say things like, "Well, there's a clinical trial I can enroll you in. Don't lose hope. We'll find a way to beat this." And instead of really sitting down and coping with what we know is coming, they'll stay in focused hope, and that really can become false hope, a different kind of F for false. And it's so sad. I've seen that happen so often, and it's really not necessary, but it's natural. You can't condemn it. We want to hold on to getting better if we can. But the people who are able to move beyond that move into more of an intrinsic hope. I for intrinsic, and it just means that hope comes from within. And people begin to hope for very different things once they let go of hoping for a cure. That letting go process is so important. Once you let go of focused hope for a cure, intrinsic hope is more about, you just hope that you can become closer with your family, that, relationships become sometimes the most important thing. You want to heal those things that you said that maybe you didn't really mean, or you want to have conversations with your parents or your children, the people that you love and who care about you, so that you can really have open caring and get some of the other stuff out of the way that just happens in life. That's intrinsic hope. And then as you get closer, and this goes beyond the paper into what's in the book, there's a third kind of hope that can happen as you get closer and closer to the end of your life, and I call that transformative hope. And what I mean by that is, uh, if you look at some of the evidence that we're finding now, and you look at some of the books that are written about research in what happens after death, uh, transformative hope uh, kind of releases you to a place where you become more accepting of the fact that the central essence of you, may not end when your body dies. You may go on. The question is, who are you? That's the most important spiritual question of all. And it's not maybe who you think you are. Doesn't matter how advanced you think you are spiritually. Who you are is very simple, very clean. It's your essence, way deep inside. In the book, I call it the I am. It's just
I
your
have to
own awareness.
interrupt you. I'm looking at that chapter right now, and I wanted to ask you about that in a few minutes. One one of the thing, and I'm thinking about what you just said because we don't really know who we are, and when you're having these conversations with your family, or I think this is just me. I think one of the most important conversations you can begin at any time are the ones with yourself. Because listen, we layer so many layers of garbage on ourselves, and most of it's just not true.
I think you're right. I think that one of the hardest things to do is to learn about yourself. And when I say yourself, I mean your habits, the way you treat people, the way you feel about your own self, and really get to know your ins and outs, your quirks. Get to know yourself inside and learn to appreciate and love your own mistakes. Because if you're honest, anybody who's honest is going to understand that in this life, none of us are perfect. The purpose of this life, if there really is a purpose, is not to be perfect. It's to learn. And so we go through life, we react to people and things, we say and do things where later we look back and we might say, why did I do that? We go through relationships and we end them, and then we look back and we realize that the next relationship we did exactly the same thing all over again. We need to learn to appreciate not just why we do what we do. We just learn to appreciate how we all try to do the best we can. Even people who you might think are evil, even people who you think are just live to hurt other people. If you could get inside them, and I often did when I spent time with them as they were dying, if you can get inside that person, you begin to understand why, what the cause of their actions really was. And what you're saying, you can do that with yourself. Where are you really coming from? And once you look into that and really spend some time quieting down and coming to understand who you are and why you are, and why you do those things you do, the next step after that is you got to love that. Really. I mean, we're here to learn, and you got to love that learning process. And that's one way I think to arrive at peace. Uh, and that's the peace that passes all understanding. We all need empathy and compassion and to help others, but helping yourself is the hardest task. It's so much easier to help
Yes,
someone else than it
it
is to
is.
understand and love yourself.
And I've said this on the show many times. We all have that negative voice in our heads. We can hear it. And I will tell you, because I mean, I fight back now. I didn't used to. I was like, oh, shut up. But now I fight back and go, I don't think that's true. But I will hear myself saying something really ugly to myself because I mean, who's going to smack me in the head? Nobody. I can get by with it, right? Until I decide that if I said, or somebody, if anybody said what I just said to me, let's say in a Walmart parking lot, I would need bail money. So quit, seriously, quit giving yourself garbage. Look at it, discuss it, say, not true, and get rid of it.
Yes, and I spend a lot of time in the book talking about that voice in your head. Everyone has a voice in their head that talks to you constantly. You don't, it's so constant that you often just lose interest and you don't even hear it. And yet that voice goes on and on and on. It's your mind talking to you. Everyone has it. You get feedback from yourself all the time. And
Constantly telling my subconscious to check something for me. Before I
yep.
go to sleep, I will turn it over because I don't sleep well. But when I know I'm actually going to go to sleep, I get all excited and I'll say, okay. And I start talking to the ceiling fan because I'm saying my prayers out loud and I'm telling my subconscious, listen, I need a review on this. Can you help me? 3:18 in the morning, it shows up.
Yep. It does. That's happened to me so often when I'm writing or when I'm engaged in something where I need an answer. It's the 4 a.m. And of course, that's also the time when some very difficult things can come up. That 4 a.m. time, you'll wake up after a nightmare or something that's really disturbed you. That's when it's important to be able to look down through that and understand that those things are all happening for a reason as well. Sometimes it's to learn things about ourselves that we may not be so comfortable with, but receiving them and accepting them all the same is really important to learn how to do.
Talking about you and yourself, I'm on page 140, and you say that the I am the real you and yourself, and there are other labels for the I am. And I'm fully aware of what you're talking about, like your soul or your spirit, but they're overused. So let's talk about that.
Okay. Um, yeah, I think that that voice in your head that talks to you all the time and often says things to you that are critical. I mean, that voice in your head is often trying to help you or make you be something different than you are or than who you are. That aspect of your mind that's always correcting you, um, that's an aspect of your what I would call yourself. Uh, you yourself, the way I use it in the book, is the you that's evolved from even before you're first aware. When you're about 2, 3 years old, you're already forming yourself, your concept of yourself. And then the older you get, your parents and your teachers form up yourself as you're going up through childhood and adolescence. And when you're on your own as an adult, yourself becomes pretty fully developed. And that voice changes very little over your life. That aspect of yourself that commands you and tries to tell you what to do is always there. But I think the reason why meditation is such an important part of many spiritual traditions, and a certain kind of prayer is important even in Christianity, going inside and finding who you are underneath that voice. Uh, I I I talk in the book a lot at various places in the book about. Uh, I tell stories about when my mind stopped. I knew who I was. It happens in nature. It can happen when you're extremely active or busy or in danger. There's lots of circumstances that will just stop that voice, and suddenly you're in silence. And if you are careful and you look carefully and notice, then you can look down underneath yourself and find who you really are. That part of yourself that's the I am. It's the real you. And we're just not aware, I don't think, most of the time because we're busy reacting to the world. You're reacting to things coming at you from outside and inside. You're reacting to that voice inside yourself. It's only when you can get underneath that and find the silence and the emptiness of who you really are, uh, where you, the part of you that came here when you were born. There's another story in the book about uh, I I looked into the eyes of a newborn baby that I had just delivered, and she looked right back at me. That was a wake-up call because she was there, and that was another point when I just had to stop. I didn't have to stop. It stopped me. And in that silence, saw another, I got another look into who I really am. And those are the times that, those are rehearsals, you could say, for when you leave this life, when you return to who you really are, because that's what survives. When your body goes, your mind will go with it, but your awareness will not. Your awareness will continue if you believe all the stories that people tell when they come back from the other side and are revived in the ICU. They'll tell you, and the stories are all the same. It doesn't matter what culture, what economic level people are, what their religious beliefs might have been. They all tell very, very similar stories, and it's that you are not the self that you think you are. You are not just your habits of thought. You are something much more basic and really much grander and much more magnificent, and yet it's silent. And it's that place that I think we can begin to find while we're still here. And that's good homework to do because you can do a little homework and begin to discover who you really are before the dying process does it for you, because it will. I can promise you that. And that may be why your grandmother had such difficulty, is you cannot avoid
Yeah.
letting go, because the dying process will uh, allow many aspects of what you have and who you are to drop away, and you will let go whether you want to or not at that point. So doing a little homework ahead of time
Right. Yes,
makes a
it's
lot of sense.
helpful. And, you know, I'm a highly committed introvert and I spend a lot of time in my own head. So I'm able to make time because I'm not chatting all the time. I'm not out and about. Just I need to be alone. I desperately need to be alone. And I spend a lot of time deep diving into, maybe I had a random thought that I'm going to argue with. It's like, that's baloney. And off I go and I start digging, where did that thought come from? And often it's from our childhood. We all blame our childhoods for everything, but there's a lot to be said for that because those layers are coming from the time you're born until the time you get out and get married or go do whatever you're going to do. And you're right, they don't really change unless or until you say, this is baloney. I'm not going to tolerate this anymore. And you start doing some deep diving. But you're talking about, the consciousness may continue beyond death. I wanted to ask you about recent studies in psychedelics. Let's talk about that because I find that fascinating.
I think it is fascinating, and there are many aspects of what people find when they say do psilocybin therapy. Well, once again, where science is now focusing on what happens in the psychedelic experience the same way that science is focusing on what happens in our experience at death. And there are lots of similarities between the two. Um, I think one thing that psychedelics may allow a person to do is to get an experience of what may lie on the other side of life. Uh, Psychedelics, and this is where the science is fascinating. How psychedelics work is they kind of put to sleep the part of your brain. It's called the default mode network. It's a network in of nerve cells in your brain that gives you that sense of who you are. It's the agent of yourself. That network in the brain, LSD and psilocybin are the two, classical psychedelics. They will put that part of your brain sort of to sleep. That's why people who take the proper dose of, say, psilocybin and psilocybin therapy will lose that sense of self. That's why it's important to have someone around when you're in that experience because it can be very disorienting when you lose that sense of who you thought you were. But what is liberated at that point are things from down deeper. And that's why I think the psychedelic experience and the near death experience are so similar. In fact, uh, having spent a quarter of a century or more in hospice, trying very hard to find medications that will help people who, say, have cancer and are so anxious and so terror stricken at the idea that they will die, that they really can't even function. There are no good medications to make that feeling go away. You can use tranquilizers, but they really just put people to sleep. What psilocybin appears to do, and what scientific studies are now showing, is that around 30% of people with terminal cancer have serious anxiety, death anxiety. They just are dreading what's coming. Roughly a third of cancer patients get almost disabled at times by how scared they are. Psilocybin therapy done right relieves that fear in over two-thirds of cases, 70%, 80% in some studies. People come out of that experience and they're not scared anymore
Huh.
because they're given a pass through the mirror that surrounds this life that you just can't see through in your regular life. You can't see outside what's on this earth and outside your life. Psilocybin will actually allow you to do that when it's conducted properly, and that anxiety actually goes away for prolonged periods of time. And we now have many scientific studies that show that. And I just think psilocybin is one way. LSD is a little tougher to manage, but for some people it works as well or better than psilocybin. Again, under the right in the right setting and with the right support, to really show a person what might be beyond uh, this this life that encases us that we can't see through or outside of. It lets us see through that. And so I think the psilocybin and LSD research that's being done now and used in a therapeutic situation is super helpful. And not only that, when one or two doses of psilocybin in therapy can relieve that anxiety, that's something that no other drug has ever been able to do. So I do think that psychedelics are giving us a new way and kind of a revolutionary way to deal with our fear of death and to give us insight into what's really important. And I won't go into how beliefs may be changed through that psilocybin experience. We can even get into how people's politics are changed by those experiences, because that can happen too. And I don't want to get into politics at all, but many of our deepest beliefs that we really think we just take for granted are true with no exceptions turn out to be a little more porous and transparent than you might think.
A long ways from Haight Ashbury.
Yep.
That's why I was so fascinated by it. I grew up in the Bay Area and I knew Haight Ashbury, and I would walk through it and see dead people. They
Mm.
they were still breathing, but they were dead. Their eyes were dead, their souls were dead. They were just sitting there waiting to die. It's one of the major reasons I have never done drugs or drink. I just not gonna do it. But oh, we are just
But
about out of time.
that's why I hate to interrupt you, but
Oh no.
I just got to throw in here that um, psilocybin and LSD are not party drugs. I've seen a lot of people back in my own old days. I've seen a lot of people use them that way and overuse them, and I think misuse them. Uh, there are people whose eyes, you look in their eyes and they do seem dead inside because they've misused the potential that I think is offered in those medications when they're used as medications in therapy. It's possible to misuse those drugs the same way we abuse other drugs that can be very beneficial if they're used correctly. So I think that's really important to point out.
Before I let you go, is there emerging research that excites you about end of life care? Is there anything new that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I think um, rather than launch into a new topic right here at the end, I think I want to re-emphasize that I think what's really new is that spirituality and science, many people think that they'll just never be reconciled, that science and spirituality are just two different disciplines and they contradict each other. I really don't think that's true. I think that science needs to wake up to what some of its own research is showing. And, I think that all of us can wake up if we learn more about what actually happens and what people are telling us happens as we die. And the only people we have to learn from are people who die and then are brought back by doctors or come back on their own. We don't really know at all what happens when people go on. But I think that it pays to look into some of that research and take a good hard look at what may be the implications of the fact that the part of yourself that you're often not aware of because it's so deep that probably does survive death is really important to get to know. And I'll just leave it at that. I think that we are much simpler and much more profound inside than we know in everyday life. And quieting down and taking some time to find that place, I think, is really valuable. And I'll just leave it at that, Denise.
And thank you for joining us today. Dr. Brad, it has been a genuine pleasure chatting with you, and I love your book. I'm fascinated with it, and I will not underline or mark a book. My school librarian would rear up out of her grave and get me. I know she would. So, but I have sticky notes all over it. So thank you. And, I have three bookcases in here because I interview a lot of authors like yourself. And the bookcase closest to me is where the books go that I know I'm going to be delving into time and time again. And I've already got a spot picked out for you. So thank you. And I really appreciate you joining us. And for the audience, excuse me, I need to cough. Episode of Your Partner in Success Radio, my guest, Dr. Brad Stuart, challenges traditional perspectives on death, revealing it as a meaningful human transition rather than a medical failure. And I think that's very important. And drawing from 50 years of medical experience, he explores how consciousness extends beyond physical existence and how hope evolves throughout life's journey. And his groundbreaking insights bridge medical science and spiritual understanding, offering listeners a compassionate, holistic approach to mortality. And his book, the one I have right in front of me, Facing Death, Spirituality, Science, and Surrender at the End of Life, provides a profound framework for understanding life's ultimate transition. So, anybody who's listening, if you are a healthcare professional, caregiver, and individuals, and you would like to approach death or help people approach death with dignity, curiosity, and hope, dig deeper into this book and head on over to Amazon and order Facing Death today and connect with him on bradstewartmd.com. Dr. Brad, thank you so much.
Thank you, Denise. It's been great.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Get your voice heard. If you would like to launch your own far-reaching podcast, contact Denise Griffiths at yourofficeontheweb.com and go to the podcast tab.